So I want to go back to basics with some of the early questions and still the questions actually I get today. And that is, how do you get better responses out of these models? And some of you might have heard things like zero shot, one shot, multi shot. I want to break that down a little bit just by example. And also, I call it priming these models. So oftentimes when novice users, beginner users, or folks who aren't using these models regularly, they'll go in and they'll put in just a blank prompt, right? Like, write me a cover letter, I'm applying to this job. And the models do okay, but often they leave a lot to be desired. They're not specific, they're very generic and mundane. And that's because the prompt that you put, the words that you put into the prompt window, the model actually uses to construct its response. And I think that's part of the reason people screw up. We're taught by search browsers like Google that, we just put in the minimal amount of information and then we get the search results. Well, don't forget that Google also uses a lot of other data other than just the words we put in a search window. They know what our browsing history is. If you're using Gmail, they also know that. So they're feeding us different search results based on our user behavior. Now, these models, the AI models, don't have that yet, although some might do, the Microsoft and Google. But something like Anthropic and even AI don't have that unless we've turned that option on so that it remembers conversations. So any words we're putting into the prompt window directly impacts the response that we get. So zero shot is when we're basically just putting in like something like, what's 2 plus 2? Okay, we're not giving an example, right? And it should respond, the answer is 4. But for more complicated math, we might want to give an example. If it was an algebra equation like, find x. For example, in the following equation, we give an example and we show how we're sort of doing the math, and then we present it a new problem. You're giving it an example, one shot, okay? Now, what I'm going to show you here is not necessarily perfect one-shot or multi-shot prompting, but this is priming. This is priming the model. So I am teaching a pragmatic use for generative AI to a full class of second and third year law students this coming semester, starts next week. And to start the first class, I am actually having them read a short story by Isaac Asimov, who is a science fiction writer, but basically developed the 3 laws of robotics. And these 3 laws of robotics, I won't bore you now, but they've been referenced in movies and all that kind of stuff. Like the first law is no robot shall intentionally or unintentionally allow a human to be hurt or killed. And they sort of build on that. I'm going to use that as one of the first class discussion points. So now I was just playing with this because I've read the story many times. I'm drawing out sort of similarities to generative AI and all that. And I just wanted to check myself and maybe get some new ideas for new angles that I might want to bring into the discussion with my class. So I could have easily just said, hey, I'm going to be teaching the short story runaround. Give me some example questions I might use to prompt discussion in my class. And it would give me some. Probably not all that helpful. So this is what I do. I prime it first, rather. Are you familiar with the story runaround? I want to make sure that the model knows what I'm talking about. And so it responded, and it starts to build into its own memory what we're talking about here. So it gives me sort of the synopsis, and I said, great, I'm teaching a course, blah, blah, blah. Can you help me identify some of the key parts of the story and the associated lessons or interesting points? And then I said, for instance, so I'm giving it an example. It's a one shot. I'm giving an example of how I've constructed or interpreted what's an interesting point of view or lesson. And so it goes on and it gives me this, okay? Now, some of these were good and some not so good. So I said, okay, thank you. And I pointed one out that it didn't pick up on. And I asked it to give me its thoughts on that. This drunk behavior that the robot shows in this. And so now it's starting to build and become much more intentional, descriptive, and thinking at a deeper level. And I do that again with another one. And so you kind of build and you can kind of see how this builds on itself. Okay. This is an example of what I'm always talking about with folks, like prime the model. Don't just give it a minimal amount of information. It's not a search window. Try to really set this up by setting the stable foundational ground of a topic you're dealing with. It's always good to sort of set the model. Are you familiar with X? Whatever it is you want to talk about with the model, your first prompt, just good best practice. Are you familiar with, and then describe sort of the area or domain. Then you can go into it. I guarantee your results will be so much more satisfying and so much more helpful. So this gives you an example of how to prime the models, as well as sort of how to think about zero shot, one shot, and few shot, multi-shot. Anyway, hope it's helpful. Back to the basics for some of you. If some of you are using the models daily, you might have forgotten to do this, or you might be doing it intuitively already. So hopefully it's helpful. Talk to you.